This is the time schedule for a technical conference in docket number 23-057-02, Dominion Energy Utah's Integrated Resource Plan for plan year June 1st, 2023 to May 31st, 2024. My name is Jacob Richardson, and I am the PSC facilitator for this conference. Next, we'll start by introducing folks, and we're going to start on this side of the room.
Sure. I'm Jen Clark. I am counsel for Dominion Energy.
Jordan Stevenson, Dominion Energy.
Tyler McIntosh, DPU. Kelly Van Hall, Dominion Energy.
Will Schwarzbach, Dominion Energy.
Eric Cortland, Division.
Lynn Cranfield, Public Service Commission.
John Delaney, Public Service Commission.
John Harvey, Public Service Commission.
Yvonne Hogan, PSC.
Brenda Salter, DPU.
Brian Eagle, DPU.
Patrick Riccu, Attorney General's Office.
Doug Wheelwright, the Division.
Jeff Heinfeld, Division.
Austin Summers with Dominion.
Terry Smith, Division.
Alex Ware with the OCS.
Bailey Bossard with the OCS.
Elsa Anderson with OCS.
Jacob Zachary with OCS.
And I haven't heard anyone. Do we know if anyone's online or on? Okay. All right. So,
We have one come in.
Casey Coleman, Division of Public Utilities.
all right. Well, I think that's it for us. So we'll turn the time now over to you.
Now, even if nobody's on the line, we are streaming, right?
We are streaming, yeah. They just can't talk. They can talk, but we can't hear them. Yeah, if you're listening on YouTube, talk all you want. Okay, so greetings. I swear we just finished our last IRP, and here we are starting again for the next year, so that's great. And we have 5 meetings scheduled for this year. Normally we don't do it in January, but we want to give you all an update on the gas price situation going on. So we scheduled one a little bit earlier this year. So that will be, the bulk of today's discussion will be on that. And then we've got 2 scheduled in April, where we'll cover Wexpro, system integrity, and rural expansion, and then another one at the end of April where we'll do a heating season review, talk about hedging, transportation, and planning, give an update on the LNG facility. And then in May, we'll do a review of our RFP, our sustainability update, long-term planning. We'll talk a little bit about specific IRP projects that we'll have planned for the next few years. And then in July, we'll give a final presentation. So just for background, in 2009, we had some standards and guidelines where we agreed to include certain items in our IRP every year. And if you're familiar with IRP, not much has changed. But these are the items that we've agreed to here on the guidelines side. And then you can see in the report where each of these items are found. We just got our final order from the commission, and this is what they said in our last IRP based on our review of the 2022 IRP, the comments and recommendations submitted by DP and LCS. Given the lack of opposition, we conclude the 2022 IRP generally complies with the standards and guidelines. And I think comments from the division office were fairly positive. I think we've been doing this so long now. I feel like we may have finally figured it out in terms of feedback and changes we need to make. There didn't seem to be many, and so we'll continue to provide the information that we provided in prior year IRPs. So this gives you an idea of all of the sections that we'll have in the upcoming IRP, and this is very similar to what we did last year. So a lot of the information that we provided last year, well, all of it will be repeated in this upcoming IRP.
Updated.
Yes.
It'll be updated, we're not just going to repeat the same thing.
Yes.
But all the sections are
Maybe
going to
some
say the
that's repeated though.
same information.
We did have a stakeholder meeting with the division office, which we typically do every year. We had that on the 9th of January. Based on some discussions with them, the feedback, they mentioned they'd like to see an LNG update, which I think we had agreed to do in a prior pass-through. So we'll be providing an LNG update both in the written document as well as the technical conference. And then supply hedging, as you'll hear today, it's becoming a very hot topic, and we'll probably be having many discussions about that this year based on what's happened this winter heating season. So stay tuned on that. And I will hand it over to Will. Give us an update on pricing.
All right. Has anyone here heard about pricing going on this winter? It's interesting. A lot of what you hear is that the mainstream, and by mainstream, I probably have a different mainstream media than most, but I watch a lot of industry news. But in a lot of it, the talk is about pricing going down this winter and low pricing across the country. Well, what you're going to see here is kind of explaining why we are a little different here in Utah. So that a lot of that mainstream industry news is not really relevant to us. We wanted to give this update as to really what's going on here and why we're a little different. So that's kind of the basis for this presentation. So this graph here is looking back at spot pricing. So this is daily spot pricing over the last 2 years at 3 different points. We have Turnertown blue, White River Hub in green. Those are the 2 primary pricing points we use for our daily spot purchases. And then I've also included in here in a bunch of graphs, this yellowish color is Henry Hub. And that's pretty reflective of what's going on, in the U.S. as a whole. So you can see, I think the number one thing that sticks out here is this is February of 2021. So that was Winter Storm Uri, impacted most of the mid-continent down to Texas, caused a great price spike in those areas and in our area. So you can see that kind of sets the scale here up to, that pricing index was over $160. So that kind of sets our scale. But what I wanted to point out now, if you look in context, here is our pricing this winter. So it's not quite the same scale, the same peak as Uri was, but it's still definitely an outlier from the rest of the period, and it's more prolonged, where, we had a day or two with Uri. This has been going on pretty much all winter. So we're going to drill a little bit more down. I just kind of wanted to set that scale with this graph. Here you can see going back just the previous year. A couple of things I wanted to show in here. Again, here's this winter where our pricing has been. You can see that yellow line representing Henry Hub, or kind of the U.S. as a whole there, tracked pretty closely with our pricing all the way up until winter really started. And that's where the discrepancy began, with our pricing going up and that Henry Hub pricing that everybody keeps talking about, U.S. natural gas prices going down or staying low. You can see that there's a spread developing.
I couldn't tell on the previous chart, did the February 2021 spike include Henry Hub also spiking?
It did. So it only spikes up to $20-something, where we were up to 160. So there was, even at that point, there was a big disparity in pricing because it mainly impacted the mid-con. We also weren't the highest of the spike. I could show, I want to say a 1 point and a couple other points in, I guess, Oklahoma, Texas. They spiked up to $1,000. But Henry Hub was a little bit isolated from that. The rest of the country, again, it was very geographically oriented. So the other thing I wanted to show on this graph, though, and something that we're gonna get into more, but again, I'm just setting some perspective here, is you can see that these are summer months right here. This is in the spring going into summer. This is June. We had a little bit drop in July, but then towards the end of July and August, we went back up. We're bordering on $10, which at the time we thought, wow, these gas prices are really high. For summertime, it was extraordinary, right? Which impacted, summertime is when we fill a lot of storage. So that gets to our storage story here for a while. We'll go back to this, but I'm just kind of setting that pricing landscape. Okay, now I want to zoom into the winter here. So this is looking at what's been going on since November. So November hit, our pricing went up a little bit from Henry Hub. especially at Kernopal. You get into December, and we started seeing some really cold days, and as we did, those prices really started to spike. We had days that were up about $40 and $50 in that pricing. Meanwhile, the rest of the country has stayed pretty stable, at least Henry Hub. There were some, I think it's Winter Storm Elliott that kind of missed us, but hit the East Coast pretty hard. So if you look at some Transco Zone 6, some places like that, Transco Zone 5, they had some really big spikes in December just for that storm as it went through. But in general, the pricing has stayed fairly low.
Well,
Yeah.
on your contracts, do you have the option to take it from White River or Northwest or Kern? Do you change day by day, or in your contracts, you say, I'm taking it from Hopewell?
So spot contracts, we can choose where we buy it from. And depending on which point, the only point that we really have that we can buy from that's at the White River Hub pricing is White River Hub. So if we're actually buying gas at White River Hub, that's the only one that's going to be on the White River Hub pricing index. And since that index, as you can see, is generally lower than the Kernopal index where we're buying the rest of our gas, we basically max out White River Hub every single day. So we're buying as much as we can. We only have about 73,000 decatherms capacity away from White River Hub. So,
Pipeline constraints?
because of the pipeline constraints and what we can get on the pipeline. So that's our transportation capacity away from that point. So we basically just fill that point up, as we say, or take as much as we can from that pricing point because it's the cheapest gas. And then everything else would be at.
And your gas you get out Northwest, is that priced at White River? Or?
It's usually priced at Kernopal.
Well, where is White River?
White River Hub is down near like Rifle, Colorado. So it is like it's right near the border of Utah. And I don't know if it's exactly in Utah or Colorado, but it's right near the border. Past Vernal, out that direction.
So does Westport have a lot of wells out in that area?
Not a lot. They're more northern.
They're more up in Opal.
Up by Opal, Wyoming kind of area. So White River Hub, there's a number of pipelines that come through there. Obviously, Mountain West Pipeline, one of them, Northwest Pipeline goes through there. CIG, I think, goes through there as well. A number of pipelines, that's what makes up a hub. And so it's on the Mountain West pipeline system that comes to us, it's the southern part of their system, which is constrained just about every day based on the amount of flow that comes from White River Hub, because that's getting your Permian gas, which is usually cheaper gas. So it's all based on constraints. All right, so that's kind of the winter. Now, so our spot gas we'll buy at daily pricing, or our peaking contracts, and we'll break this down a little more here coming up, are based on that daily pricing index. But there's also first of month pricing indexes. And the ones we generally use are, they're called Inside FERC, Northwest Rockies, or Inside FERC SoCal. I've also put an Inside FERC Henry Hub on here as well. So what these are monthly pricing indexes. So they change. There's bid week, which is usually the last week of the month, which there's bids and sales of gas, and that kind of sets the price for those first of the month contracts for the whole month. So like this week is bid week for February, so people are buying monthly contracts for gas for the month of February right now. So I pulled a little over 10 years worth of data on these first of the month contracts. And as you can see, they've been flat, right? With the exception of, we had some, in 2018, 2019, some of those contracts went up again to just over $10. There's been a little volatility since then, but this was January, first of the month contracts over here. These are, Henry Hub was still down here, you can't see it on the end of the chart here, but SoCal, Citygate, and Northwest Rockies were both upwards of about $50. I think Northwest Rockies was about $49.70, and SoCal was about 54. So total outlier. So, and this, as we've talked about in a lot of our hedging discussions, is often a hedge, right? Your first of month pricing, you hedge against those intra-month kind of daily spikes. And this has been very successful in doing that in the past. The risk that you run is that when those bids are being set or when those prices are being set, there's something that scares the market, drives it up, and then you're living with that for the whole month. Well, apparently that's what happened at the end of December. You had some cold forecasts. It drove up those first of the month bids, and we wound up with this. So this is going to kind of give us a reset on how we think about these first of month pricing deals as a hedge, because these are base load contracts. We take the gas every month, so we're paying that price for the whole month.
Every day.
Yeah, and we'll get into the volumes and stuff.
Will you just point out where Storm Uri was on this chart, just to illustrate your point that the first of the month has been
Right
pretty, yeah, so when those spot daily prices were going up, we weren't impacted on our first of the month contracts because we locked it in the lower price.
So again, this has been a really good hedge going back, but this month is an outlier. Eric?
Yeah, isn't there more than just weather?
Yeah, there's. So we're going to talk about the story of what's causing pricing in general. I just wanted to touch on kind of the difference between those daily indexes and the first of month. All right, so our question is, this is getting to what you're getting at is why? Why are these prices so different now than they've been for, looking back? So there's a bunch of stories here, and I'm going to kind of go into them a little bit. We'll start with demand. Weather in the West, including the Pacific Northwest, last summer was hot and dry, right? Does everyone remember how hot and dry it was last summer? Well, what that did was it reduced the availability of hydropower generation in California, and also what the Pacific Northwest could export to California. So it meant that California was kind of on their own to generate their own electricity. It also meant hot and dry weather means more air conditioning running. There was increased demand at the same time. And that increased demand for power generation, most of it was met by increased thermal generation. And in the past, thermal generation meant coal and natural gas. Well, California has gotten rid of most of their coal generation. I think there's one coal plant left. So as you can see in my little graph that I included here, this is just showing from July to August. This was the change from July to August, which is when your demand was really starting to go up. That demand wasn't met by your solar generation, stayed flat, maybe even a little decrease. Your wind generation, flat or maybe even a little decrease. Imports had a tiny little bit of a spike, but you can see the majority of that increased demand was met with thermal generation or natural gas. And then if you look even more micro level at September, remember the fun September heat wave where the first week of September was all over 100 degrees here? Well, it was the same was going on in California. They met that with up to 60% of their fuel mix for generation was natural gas at that point.
How much of California's gas comes from rockies?
A lot.
Nearly all?
I would say, well, we're going to get to the supply side of things too, because there's some supply things that are going on, which is making it, you're my plant today, thanks. But yeah, you're spot on, is what does that mean on the supply side? So a lot of natural gas being burned in California, as ironic as that sounds, being that they want to get away from fossil fuels and their energy policies, they are burning a lot of natural gas. So add to that now, starting in this is our weather. So this is heating degree days. So the heating degree days from October through January 14th I have on here are in green. So anytime the green line is above that blue line, which is our normal expected heating degree days, I'm standing right here, okay. So that means that it was colder than normal. fall anytime that it's above there. So we actually started with a pretty warm October, but then right at the end of October, it started getting cold, and you can see through October and November, and even into most of December, we were colder than normal. California kind of had the same thing going. So as you keep that in mind, now we did warm up a little here at the end of December. We got some of these wet storms and stuff. You may not have noticed it, but we were actually a little warmer than normal temperature-wise. Unfortunately, most of the damage was done right in here. And amongst my group in my office, they probably heard me say, in September and October, we talked a lot about where our storage was, and we're going to talk about storage here in a minute. And what I kept telling everybody is, we're going to be fine. I'm a little scared what's going to happen in the market if we have a cold fall and early winter, which is exactly what we had. So digging a little more, okay, now let's get to the supply side, what you were asking about. If you remember pricing, back to the previous graph that I showed, we had high pricing for summers, right? Usually pricing in the summer drops, and that's where our low pricing is because production outpaces our demand. Well, this summer was a little different. Our demand was actually up. We had a lot of LNG exports, so we were sending a lot of gas over to Europe, which was in high demand for Europe, and pricing was high. So we just had a lot, and then we had the power generation as well. So demand was actually up, production was down, and as a result, all summer our pricing didn't do what it normally does. We didn't have the low pricing for the summer that we usually use to fill our storage. Luckily, that has changed, and we'll get to that. But then this last line down here is the key to what Eric's asking, is how much do they get from the Rockies? Well, recently they've been getting a lot more of it from the Rockies than they normally would, because there's a line that's been out to Southern California that comes from the Permian in Texas. That it's an El Paso natural gas, they call it Line 2000. That's been out since an explosion in August of 2021. So the supplies into Southern California have been greatly reduced by this line being out. So they've been getting almost all of their gas for California from the Rockies and through Kern River, through Ruby, and yeah, so it's mostly Rockies because of that line being out. So what else does it mean? So this all impacts storage, right? Storage in the natural gas world is really how you match, you see what's going on with supply and demand, because the molecules have to go somewhere, right? If your supply is ahead of your demand, you'll get gas going into storage. If it's vice versa, you get your storage declining. So everyone watches storage to really tell the story. So here's a little precursor to the storage story. So in the summer of 2021, we're going back in time here, PG&E reclassified 51 BCF of their storage from working gas to cushion gas. That was done through their rate case, and it reflected, I guess, a shift in how they plan to operate. They're planning to use that storage for reliability, not just managing prices. So they've made an adjustment to their storage. You can see it on this chart down here, right? So this blue line is their PG&E working gas and storage, and the blue shaded is kind of their 5-year band. Well, there's where they made that adjustment, and you can see now their working gas and storage is well below where they've been previously, right? What struck me about this graph then is we've got the PG&E Citygate daily pricing. So this is their pricing index for PG&E Citygate. Relatively flat right up until they made that storage adjustment. As soon as they did that, you could see the volatility increase and the pricing go up as soon as they made that adjustment. So they had less storage available to them, more volatility in their pricing market because they just can't balance it out.
Does that have to do with the ASO opinion?
You know, I'm not exactly sure why they made the adjustment other than to reestablish how they're going to use their
It
storage.
seems like a lot of gas.
But it was done through their regulatory and how they wanted to manage things.
So is that kind of like a just-in-time change? You know, if you think of inventory
No, they didn't
There's
have,
any, because they basically don't have any more storage availability. They don't have any more, none of their system has changed really yet. They haven't added more storage capacity.
they just have more gas that's just gonna sit in the ground and
Classified
stay there.
differently.
Yep, but it means that it's just gonna sit in the ground and stay there. It is not gonna get used to balance their pricing, it's just gonna be in the ground. And I guess the reason why they're saying they're gonna keep it, kind of like we've done with the LNG facility, where it's gonna be there for those emergency needs, but it's not gonna balance pricing out, so it's just sitting. So they've apparently reclassified it as cushion gas, that's kind of there in case of emergency, not used for normal storage purposes.
Is that just that one storage facility, or do they have to use a bunch of different?
I think it's at a few.
Could a few?
Yeah, it's a combination. But anyway, so that's just part of the story, right? That's PG&E's story, but it's building to an overall impact of storage. So now I want to talk about what's going on with storage in general. Again, that's how supply and demand really gets balanced. So let's talk about storage. This is the EIA puts out a storage report every week. This is the latest one. It came out on Thursday. It comes out every Thursday. If you're ever interested, you can watch EIA site. They'll give you what's going on with storage, whether it was a deficit or give you all the details. But this kind of sums it up right here. This is the gray is average, right? The 5-year average, so 2022. This is total U.S. underground storage. So this is the big picture. This is what the U.S. looks like. This is why everyone is saying that, you know, our pricing this summer as U.S. is going to drop, because they're expecting production to outpace demand, supply to outpace demand. They expect this storage to build. So you can see U.S. good shape, right? Green line, this kind of ended December 31st. The blue kind of picks up right here. This is 2023. So you can see where we're at right now is in a good position. We're kind of in the middle of that 5-year band. We're right there near the average. Looking good, right? This next graph, this is the mountain region. So this is us. This is where we're sitting. You know, similar story. We're a little bit below the average, but we're still, this blue line is still sitting kind of right in the middle. Not a bad spot, which is, you know, our clay basin and stuff like that. Similar situation. I feel good about our storage situation where we are in the middle of winter right now with storage. And that's kind of the mountain region as a whole. This is the Pacific. This is California. So their green line, you can see starting even in the summer here, started setting a new floor to their 5-year average. You look at the blue line now, where, you know, it was down here before. This is January, right? So if you look at where it was, the 5-year average for January, this is where the green line is where it started last year, January. This is where the Pacific is right now in their storage, right here. So even with that adjustment last year, because that was made back in 2021, right? They were, you know, California was here. They were, you know, towards the bottom, but at least in a better position. But if you look here and going into April, in a good spot, right? Pretty much right at their average. But summertime, they never got filled. At least looking at this, it tells me California never got their storage full. And I don't know if that was because of the high demand, and they just didn't, they had to use it for power gen, and they didn't have the access to put into storage. I don't know if it was because prices were high. Remember we looked at the pricing graph and showed all those high prices all summer? Maybe they waited, and then, you know, the heat wave kicked in, and they never could catch up. But for whatever reason, storage in California is really, really low. And that's why, and since California is using Rockies gas for everything, that's why we are very correlated with California, because they're using all the same pipelines to get their gas there, so same gas markets. And we are suffering from the situation that is going on in California. That's basically why our pricing is where it is, along with the fact that we've had high demand, right? It's been cold. We were talking about it this morning before the meeting started about, man, it's been cold and someone was ready to move to Vegas, right? Like, it's too cold. So it's been those factors that, you know, that's where we are. It was nothing we could have really done to change it. It's just we're kind of a victim of what's been going on, downstream of us at this point.
So, Will, with regard to this Dazzle in California is, how much of their reclassification of their storage does that impact the results of this graph and how it's depicted at all?
Well, if you think these are BCF, right? So that's 200 BCF. So I would say their drop from average right there is probably close to that 51 BCF, right? It's probably a little bit less than that, right? They may have mitigated some of it, but if they had bumped up that 51 BCF, you're still putting us right at the bottom, just not as bad. But so it had an impact. It's not the whole story for sure, but it's just one more thing that added to this like perfect storm of being in a really bad storage position going into the winter. So where are we at? I kind of alluded earlier about what do our contracts look like and what are we subjected to. So I've got everything kind of color coded here so you can see, but this is our breakdown for a peak day, right? So this is worst case scenario. We had to pick some day to kind of show you what the percentages were, but just know that the contracts are in here. This is how much we forget from this. But so our Wexpro production right now, we're seeing about 155,000 a day. Our storage withdrawal, if we needed it, we could do about 246,000. That's on full withdrawal though, right? And if this was for a couple days, where remember the Uri spike was just a couple days, we hit our storage really, really hard to mitigate it. Well, when it's a month long, we can't really do that. If we used all of our aquifer storage, which we have used our aquifer storage here and there on the higher send out days and stuff like that, but we've also had to kind of fill it back up, so it's kind of been balancing each other out. We try and work with that, but we can't just say, okay, we're gonna not buy and just use our storage through the whole thing, because unfortunately it's a prolonged event, not a short duration event. So we've got our storage withdrawals going into this year. So if you remember that graph with the summertime pricing, well, forward curves kind of follow that same pricing. We did an RFP for 77,000 decatherms of fixed price gas. We did that in July. If you looked at that graph, it was right in the middle of that dip. So when we kind of went through the discussions about how to do that fixed price last year, we said, hey, we kind of the first year went through it and kind of had a very strict schedule of we came in here and had a meeting set up. We said, okay, we're going to do the IRP aligned with that meeting. We reviewed all the contracts the offers that came in during that meeting. And then after the meeting, we went back and kind of we struck on the deals. That was like a 2-day process, which in the world of getting a fixed price deal, that's an eternity. So we kind of said for this year, we want a little more flexibility as to when, so that we can watch the market for when it drops. We can then act pretty quickly on those deals and kind of say, okay, we see the market going down. We're going to do the RFP today. We're going to get those responses back, and within hours, we had those deals struck. We were able to do that right during that little dip that we saw in July, and we got pretty good prices, or at least when we look back on those prices at the end of this year, I think we're going to be pretty happy with those fixed price contracts. Let's say that they were about $8 to put it in perspective to what we've been seeing on some of the others. So I think we're going to be pretty happy with those. The ones, these baseload monthly deals, we have about 174,000. That means we take that baseload gas all month, and those are at most of which are all this 174 is at monthly index pricing. So that's that inside FERC pricing. Some of it is SoCal Citygate, most of it's Rockies, but that's the one where we're taking that gas every day and we're taking it at that first price, which has been good and bad. I'll show you that in a second. Then the rest of this, the spot purchases, the peaking deals, and we do have one baseload deal that's at daily index pricing, and those fluctuate on the day, right? Those are what we try and normally hedge against. That's what makes this up. I just have some notes down here real quick. Those monthly index baseload deals, we actually have some that carry over and are multi-year deals. So those will be December through February of 23, 24. We have about 85,000, and then we have about 30,000 that carries on into the following year. There are some things we can do to mitigate those for future years if we decide to do that.
Can you remind me about the SoCal gas? Is that a backhaul of the Southern system?
It's not. It's just the pricing index that was used for it.
That's the one
Because
they offered you in the IRP?
yes, so because it's on Kern River, you know, again, we're subject to downstream, right? They can either sell it to us or move it to Southern California. So there's a pretty big discount on it. Is set at the SoCal City Gas pricing, but there's a pretty big discount added to it. So like say 50 cents or so, you know, off of that, which usually is a good deal. When you look back historically, because they've tracked so closely to each other, it's like, okay, we're going to get a discount to the SoCal City Gate. But if something does go on at SoCal City Gate, we're subject to it. So yeah, we're at the pricing index because that gas could flow on Kern River too. So, but these, we can talk here in a minute about what we can do to possibly mitigate these. Let's go into
A couple of questions and comments. So the storage withdrawal of a fair amount of that gas would be Wexpro gas that's been put in the summer.
yes. So most of the gas that goes into our storage is Wexpro gas. We will buy some additional supply in the summer so that we can max out those, but most of that supply gets moved to the tank.
Can you give me a ratio? Is it 51% Wexpro or 90%?
I would say it's probably closer to 90.
Oh.
Yeah.
It would fluctuate by month, yeah.
And then that 465 that would be
The majority of our gas is, and I'd say
nearly all.
nearly all of our gas going into storage.
The other question, so you're obligated to, like Wexpro storage base load, the base load deals, that gas you're gonna be bringing on the system no matter what. I mean,
Yeah.
1.2 is a design date, but you may be using 800,000 or 1.2. I guess the
You've got-
lever is these.
You've got almost
spots,
600,000 in there. That's daily, right? This
Right.
is these two right here are the ones that adjust on the day, depending on how much gas we're using.
Okay.
Everything else is fixed. All of these are fixed. This one's actually fixed too, even though the pricing is not fixed. But this is where our daily fluctuation.
That's what's left.
Well, when you said about 90% of what goes into storage is Wexpro, does that also apply to LNG? Or am I getting ahead to one of the future tech conferences?
Probably getting ahead a little bit because that's a little bit different because of when and going forward, yes, the gas we put in will most likely be mostly Wexpro because we will fill in the summer. Because of this year, it's a little different just because of when we wound up filling.
Like one other question on the, how much variability is there in the Wexpro production? You said that these are all fixed amounts, but
Yeah. It's pretty steady at 155 every day. Every once in a while, they'll have to do some maintenance or maybe there's sometimes an outage due to a compressor goes down or something like that. But in general, it's been 155 steady for most of the winter. We are expecting some more to come on here and there, and that's how much we're actually getting. So that's downstream of fuel, compressor fuel, all that kind of stuff. The actual production is probably closer to 165, 170, somewhere in there. But what we get is about 155 at this point. Is there another question? Did that answer your question, John? All right, so let's kind of combine a bunch of this information here into one graph. So if you look at this graph, I've got a lot going on, but I'm going to break it down for you here. So it may look familiar, some of it, right? So that the blue line and the green lines are your Kern-Opal White River Hub. Those are your daily pricing lines, right? Everything in here is by day. So then what I've done is I've layered in the dashed lines here, which are those inside Firth Rockies and side first, SoCal pricing. So as you can see, as daily pricing went, and I've also put Henry Hub in there because that just stayed flat. You can kind of see it as a comparison. And then my favorite line of all, I think, is probably this red line because that one stays nice and flat regardless of whatever else happened. But let's look. So as our daily pricing spiked up all through December, and even in November, you can see those first month pricing was a good hedge, right? I mean, those were set early, and regardless of what happened through the month, we were happy with them, right? We're like, oh man, we're glad we have these baseload deals in place. Get into January, and it got a little bit warmer here, and all of a sudden, and then our first of month pricing took that big jump, and our daily pricing went down. So this is where we've not been happy with those first of month pricing. Meanwhile, again, we had those prices we fixed in there this summer, and those have stayed kind of below both. So that gives you kind of a preview of what we'll look at the end of the heating season as to how our hedging went. And we're going to dig deeper into it, but this just gives you kind of an idea of how things have been going. With that, daily pricing up early, it's kind of settled down, but even down is, we're talking $15, $16 on a regular basis as a down pricing from where it was in December, where it was above $40 and $50. All right, so this is just some of our fixed daily costs. So I wanted to break out, we're kind of ignoring all the stuff that's on the daily index and saying, okay, what are we paying on baseload gas that we know how much we're paying every day right now? So if you look back in December, so here's those baseload deals. This adds to the 174 that we showed on the other slide, right? So these are your combination of Northwest Rockies and SoCal, those first of the month pricing. So for December, and then I added in here the baseload, and again, these are approximate costs, not exact deal costs of anything. There's adders and subtractors on both. I kind of just used an approximate cost across here to give you an idea. But so we're getting a baseload gas at a fixed price about 251,000 decatherms a day. These are in 1,000 decatherms a day, and these are in $1,000, which means on a fixed basis, we're paying about $2.8 million a day for 250,000 decatherms of gas, and that's for December. So January, when those first of month pricing kicked up, that same fixed price gas went from $2.8 million to $9.5 million a day in January. So February hasn't started yet, but we already can calculate some of the costs, making some assumptions. So we made a change though. So instead of 174,000 of first of month pricing, we went ahead, looked at the forward market and said, okay, how much is gas going for right now? We worked with our counterparties that those deals were, we converted some of them. So right now we've converted 75,000 of that 174. We've converted it from a first of month pricing to a fixed price for February. And again, there's a couple of different deals, they're at different pricing, but that 75 million is now fixed in at about 1.5 million, or 75,000 fixed in at about 1.5 million a day that we're paying for that gas, which reduces our exposure to the first of month market. So this over here is kind of our exposure. If that first of month pricing comes in, and I use the same for bulk, right? So it's just, if that comes in at $10, an average of $10 between the two indexes, that'll be our total fixed price, where it was 2.8 in December. If they come in at $10, it would be 3.3 million. Comes in at $20, it'll be 4.5. If it comes in at $50 again, like it just did, we'd be at 8.3 instead of the 9.5. So we did fix that. It gives us a little more stability. We may still in this week layer in a little bit more of that, but the idea there is just kind of taking some of that exposure out to that high first of month price that we just saw. John.
So you mentioned earlier in the presentation that this week is the bid week.
Yes.
What kind of information do you get about that process?
So we kind of get some updates through the week as to who's been bidding, what those bids are going on. So we're going to be watching those through the week.
So there's about look at December and January, there's about a $7 million increase today. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And times 30, so we're talking $2 million and more costs.
Just for this, yes. Unfortunately in December, fortunately in January, the spot cost went down a little in January, so yeah, added on to, this is just the fix, so you've got spot added on top, so yeah, you're gonna have some high spot price, daily prices added on this in December, and that'll drop down a little bit, and I'll set it in January, but yeah, you've got some, but yeah,
Ballpark right.
you've got some high gas costs in December. We're trying to mitigate that for February. Which brings us to where are prices going, right? Where are they going to be? What are they saying? So these are forward pricing for and the blue line that's Northwest Rockies, and we generally buy it at Kerno Powell. So they've got the two indexes, but honestly they're basis adjusted and they're basically the same. So I just kind of wanted to show that those two indexes are basically the same. SoCal has got a little bit of a premium built onto it, but what we focus on mainly where we buy most of our day gas and everything is this Kerno Powell index. You can see where this was taken January 20th. That was the latest one I had yesterday when I updated this. You can see that they're expected for the rest of this month to be around $14, $13 to $14, which makes sense. That's about what we were seeing. We're seeing probably 15, 16 today. But then it is supposed to drop. So we're expecting basically by March 1st here, this is the March 1st pricing, we're expected to go down to $4. So you're seeing $4 and then $2 again in the beginning of summer. $3 towards the end of summer, and then winter pricing for next year, forward pricing right now is $6-7 is what they're saying. Forward pricing for next winter for here is going to be. That there's a lot of factors to that. Let me continue to give you the lay of the land, and we'll talk about those factors. Why we think. This is kind of the longer term look at that same curve. So what we just saw was just right in here, and then kind of watch the green line is the key, and it balances out. But you're looking at $2 to $3 range, going forward in the summers with pricing up to $6-7, and then that spread starts to decline where your summer pricing goes higher, your winter pricing stays about the same, so your spread declines. But this is kind of where we expect pricing to go. So this makes it look like this winter is an anomaly, but we don't necessarily know. So let's talk about some things going forward. This is actually my last slide. So that El Paso natural gas line that we talked about getting more supply other than just the Rockies going into California. They put out a notice the other day that work is scheduled to be completed by the end of the month. They then need PHMSA approval to put the line back in service. They haven't really said how long they expect that to take. I would hope that PHMSA's got it high on their list to look at that and get it going. But that will increase our supply into Southern California. That will drastically help our situation as soon as that goes back in. Short term, we do have colder weather forecasted for kind of the end of this week and early February. But from what I've seen, the forecast after that seems to moderate a bit. And, I don't see it getting warm, but there were some forecasts out there that were kind of scary. They had some polar vortex stuff coming our way, some Arctic cold, as they call it. So, but those have seemed to have tempered, and we do show cold weather, but not anything Arctic cold. Which that's where I start to get worried is when you start seeing those polar vortex things that people get worried about, freeze-offs and high demand. Those tend to scare them more. Long term, I've mentioned already, but they expect that supply-demand dynamic to shift as early as this summer, where we expect to be in more of an oversupplied position position, meaning that we expect production to outpace demand for this summer. You're seeing things like Europe, where we were sending all that LNG to Europe, and there was a big fight for LNG to go to Europe last summer. Well, Europe kind of got lucky, I guess, and had a really warm winter. They have not had much of a winter, so their storage is actually in much better position than they thought it would be. So I think that's actually going to help us this summer, at least with pricing. You've also got, we've had a really wet winter out west, where the concerns about the hot, dry summer last year impacting that hydro production. I'm pretty hopeful that with the rain that they've had in California and just the wet weather in general, that hydro will come up. I don't know this for a fact, but I'm hopeful that hydro will come up a little bit, decreasing the need for that power gen from natural gas. And we're also looking at, so those are factors that do happen to price. We're looking at, those deals where I said we've got those first of the month deals that go through next winter and even the winter after that. Like I said, we did for February, where we fixed some of the pricing on those deals. We may actually look at, we kind of want to talk about our overall approach with those first of the month deals in general. Are those still a good hedge going forward? Or do we want to shift away from that and go to more fixed pricing? Which, as you know from last year, fixed pricing doesn't always save you money, but it does reduce your risk and your exposure to what we're seeing this winter. But we are looking at the idea of maybe taking some of those first of the month pricing contracts and locking them in at a fixed price. Again, we're seeing $6-7 in the forward curves for next winter. So if we were to lock those in, we could probably get those around that price for next winter, which, if prices go down to $3 again, we're not making out, but it could save us from $50. So we've probably got to really reevaluate in general what we do with our first of the month hedging. Do we want to do that, or do we like the fixed price better? Kelly, did you have, that was my last slide, so I didn't know if you had anything to add. No,
What about Wexpro? They have anything going on in increased supply?
Yeah, so they've got one idea that's, I would say it's a little more speculative, and they'll probably talk to you a little bit more about that in their presentation. But there are some operators who have production in areas where they operate, like in Southwest Wyoming, that are interested in selling some of their production. So they're in talks with those people now. We'll keep you all prices at it if that gets legs.
But keep in mind, Wexpro's still they've got limitations where they've got to compare to that 5-year curve. So
Right.
So the idea is, yes, we keep saying, hey, can we get more? Can you guys ramp up that production a little bit? So we are hopeful that could be more in the mix. Any other questions, or did I kind of cover everything?
Back on the chart for the contracts that have been changed from first of month pricing to fixed pricing for February.
Sure.
What is the opportunity for converting the volume you don't know the cost for yet? Have those you've maxed out as far as converting those over, or is there still?
We haven't. The thing you have to be careful of, and that we had to be wary of, right? With 174,000, if we were to go out into that market and just say one day, hey, we want to convert 174,000, that's going to drive the market up on its own, right? So we didn't want to drive that market up. We converted with two of our, again, those have multiple counterparties, so we converted with two of those counterparties, kept kind of the volume small, did a couple different deals on different days, kind of layered it in. So that's why I said we may look at layering in a little bit more, but because it was in such a short time period and so close to February, if we start doing that, we start driving up the price.
Absolutely.
And we didn't want to impact the market that way. So we kept it to about 40% of where we wanted to be.
Thank you.
Well, if there's no other questions, we'll conclude the meeting. So,